Sierra Leone versus Uncle Sam. The visa overstay showdown. Can Freetown turn deportation into diplomacy? Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, the platform where Africa's stories are told without fear or favor. I'm Ahisatu Kamara Kargbo. Today we unpack a story making headlines from Freetown to Washington. Sierra Leone has formed a special committee to address citizens who overstayed their U.S. visas, a move stirring debate across the continent. Is this compliance under pressure or a calculated step toward diplomatic redemption? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a Sierra Leonean story. It's an African story about dignity, diplomacy, and the delicate dance between migration and power. On 29th of September 2025, Sierra Leone's Foreign Affairs Minister Timothy Kaba revealed that Freetown has established a high-level tripartite committee, Foreign Affairs, Civil Registration, Immigration, to identify Sierra Leoneans who overstayed U.S. visas and arrange their repatriation. Sierra Leone Monitor. The stated purpose: to satisfy U.S. demands, restore trust, and perhaps ultimately get back normal visa processing for Sierra Leonean applicants. The communiqué is carefully calibrated. It appeals to compatriots in the U.S. to voluntarily return, frames the initiative as part of Freetown's responsibility to protect the integrity of its passport system, and underscores that the government is working with U.S. authorities to ease visa restrictions. On the face of it, that's serious. Repatriating citizens who entered legally, with national documents, but overstayed. On the ground, however, the challenge is magnitudes greater, not least because the underlying diplomatic friction is intertwined with U.S. visa policy, overstay data, and politics. Historical backdrop and legal levers. To understand this move, one must recall that in 2021, the U.S. placed Sierra Leone under Section 243D visa sanctions, citing Sierra Leone's alleged failure to accept deported nationals who overstayed or violated U.S. immigration law. Under that measure, visa restrictions initially targeted certain Sierra Leonean officials, but over time have broadened, affecting ordinary citizens' ability to travel. In 2025, the U.S. introduced broader restrictions via a presidential proclamation linked to national security and overstay metrics that enacted partial suspension of visa issuance for B, F, M, J categories to Sierra Leone and several other countries. The restrictions apply to citizens outside the United States who do not already hold valid visas. Existing valid visas are not automatically revoked. This means Sierra Leone's diplomatic room to maneuver is constrained. Any negotiation must reckon with U.S. law, internal overstay statistics, and political calculations in Washington. The Africa context: overstay policies, sanctions, and variations. Sierra Leone is hardly unique. Across Africa, many states face similar pressure. U.S. and other Western countries, visa systems increasingly condition access on cooperation in repatriation, data sharing, and overstay performance. Comparative examples. Zimbabwe. In 2025, the U.S. paused routine visa applications for Zimbabwean citizens, citing concerns about overstay and documentation issues. Burundi, Togo, Laos, Cuba, Turkmenistan, Venezuela. These countries have been subject to partial suspensions on U.S. visa issuance, non-immigrant student exchange, under the 2025 restrictions. Eritrea, Somalia, Libya, Sudan, etc. Some nations have faced fuller visa suspensions, often justified by weak identity systems, internal instability, or lack of cooperation in deportations. In commentary, some analysts have questioned the consistency of U.S. selection. For example, the Republic of the Congo, IROC, is banned for B1, B2 issuance due to high overstay rates, while the neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, which by many accounts has even more serious overstay and enforcement challenges, was spared. Thus, Sierra Leone's predicament is part of a continent-wide trend. Visa access increasingly tied to compliance in migration control, and African governments are often forced to choose between sovereignty in migration decisions and reputational, diplomatic pressures. Key differences in variables: administrative capacity. Some African states have better identity, civil registration, border control, and document verification systems. Those with stronger systems enjoy more credibility in U.S. Western eyes. Bilateral leverage. Countries with stronger trade, security, or geopolitical ties may have more room to negotiate. E.g., Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa have greater leverage than smaller states. Overstay data transparency. Where governments can credibly control or track their diaspora, they can argue against wholesale restrictions. Domestic political cost. Repatriation can be politically sensitive, e.g., reintegration costs, local employment, stigma, so not every state is eager to forcibly repatriate. For Sierra Leone, the formation of a special committee is a signal that it wants to be seen as taking responsible steps, but signaling alone may not suffice. Critical analysis, strengths, risks, and caveats. Strengths of Freetown's approach. 1. Signaling good faith. The committee is a visible step to show Washington and other visa-granting authorities that Sierra Leone is serious about compliance. It transforms rhetoric into ostensible action. 2. Domestic control and legitimacy. By centralizing vetting across registration, immigration, and foreign affairs, the government aims to avoid misidentifications or wrongful deportations. 3. Bargaining chip. If Freetown can produce credible lists of overstayers and show a path for return, it may use that as leverage in bilateral talks to remove or soften visa sanctions. 4. Public diplomacy angle. The government can appeal to diaspora communities and embed this in public awareness campaigns. Already, the Information Ministry is working with the U.S. Embassy to build messaging on visa compliance. MOIS, risks and weaknesses. 1. Data and tracking challenges. Identifying overstayers in the U.S. is non-trivial. Records may be patchy, people may use alternate identities, or may have left the U.S. already. 2. Voluntary return may attract few takers. The voluntary return approach may appeal to few, especially among those who have built livelihoods or families abroad. Coercive deportation is politically difficult. 3. Costs of reintegration. Returnees may require housing, job placement, social services, all of which impose fiscal burdens. If the government lacks credible reintegration plans, these returns can backfire. 4. Reputational and human rights backlash. If deportations or repatriations are handled heavy-handedly or mistakenly target lawful residents, civil society and diaspora groups may push back citing human rights. 5. Waiting for U.S. reciprocity. Even if Sierra Leone does all its homework, restoration of visa processing is in U.S. hands. The U.S. may delay decisions, shift criteria, or demand further commitments. 6. Signal to diaspora. Some might go underground. The prospect of being flagged might push some overstayers further into clandestine status, making future outreach harder. The political and symbolic costs with a bit of humor. One might imagine a U.S. consular officer chuckling, "Ha, now Sierra Leone is sending us a most wanted list. But where's my Oscar for best repatriation drama?" In reality, Freetown must avoid looking like it's policing its own diaspora under U.S. pressure. The act of vetting your own people so they can go home might not sit well in local discourse if framed as external coercion. Also, one hopes the committee doesn't require people to fill out a 15-page form and submit DNA, fingerprints, and a letter from their U.S. neighbor. The process must be humane, dignified, and efficient, not Kafkaesque. Forward-looking considerations and scenarios. Here are possible trajectories and recommendations, including some that may sound optimistic or cheeky. Best case scenario, a reset. Agreement 1. The committee produces verifiable data and begins phased repatriations, voluntary or by agreement. 2. Sierra Leone negotiates with the U.S. to lift or ease its visa restrictions within 12-18 months, restoring full visa categories. 3. Freetown leverages the exercise to modernize its civil registration, biometric systems, and diaspora engagement, becoming a stronger migration interlocutor. 4. The initiative builds confidence, enabling more exchanges, students, trade, tourism, and boosting Sierra Leone's soft power. Middle ground, partial success, and prolonged waiting. The committee succeeds in repatriating a modest number, but domestic costs slow the process. Washington eases some visa categories, e.g., student or exchange, but B visa access remains constrained. The process becomes a multi-year negotiation, and diaspora applicants must continue facing uncertainty. Worst case, symbol without substance. The committee fails to deliver credible results due to data gaps, lack of trust, or diaspora disengagement. The U.S. demands more stringent benchmarks, and visa suspensions remain, possibly extended or expanded. Domestic backlash arises from communities abroad who feel unfairly targeted or abandoned. Freetown ends up being criticized as a puppet of external pressure, weakening political legitimacy. Strategic enhancements to consider. 1. Diaspora partnerships. Engage Sierra Leonean diasporas in the U.S., community organizations, churches, advocacy groups to build trust, open communication, and voluntary registration. 2. Transparency and safeguards. Make the vetting criteria public. Institute appeals or oversight mechanisms. Protect lawful residents and guard against misuse. 3. Phased pilot returns. Start with small, manageable pilot repatriations, e.g. within certain states or jurisdictions in the U.S., to test the process. 4. Reintegration support. Map out jobs, housing, vocational training, counseling, partner with NGOs, private sector, and local governments to absorb returnees without creating social stress. 5. Parallel migration reforms. Use this as impetus to strengthen civil registration, biometric systems, passport security, identity databases, and interagency data sharing, so that future non-compliance is harder. 6. Leverage multilateral forums. Bring up the issue in ECOWAS, African Union, and diaspora summits to share best practice, commit to regional norms, and push back on unilateral visa restrictions by external powers. 7. Contingency diplomacy. Be ready with countermeasures, e.g. reciprocal visa curbs, public diplomacy pressure, if the U.S. drags its feet, but use them sparingly to avoid escalation. Recent developments and signals, 2025, mid-2025. Sierra Leone's Information Minister, Chernor Ba, met with the U.S. Embassy in August 2025 for joint messaging on visa compliance and public awareness campaigns. The U.S. State Department, via its official visa suspension announcement, June 2025, listed Sierra Leone among countries facing partial suspension of visa issuance, non-immigrant and student exchange visas, under its new policy. The new restrictions, effective 9 June 2025, are to be reviewed periodically, every 90 or 180 days. In June 2025, Sierra Leoneans publicly decried the partial travel ban as undermining rights to education and mobility. Meanwhile, the U.S. has taken further steps against African visa non-compliance. As of August 2025, visa services in Zimbabwe were paused due to overstay concerns. These recent developments suggest that the U.S. is doubling down on using visa policy as leverage, especially in Africa, Whether Sierra Leone's new committee can produce credible performance fast enough to match that pace is the big question. The bigger picture: migration, morality, and mutual interests. At its core, the Sierra Leone-U.S. visa tussle is not just about overstayers. It's a story about asymmetrical power and the new global politics of migration control. Washington wants to show it can discipline non-compliant nations. Freetown wants to prove it can cooperate without appearing submissive. Caught between these aims are real people, students, traders, and professionals whose dreams now depend on a bureaucratic peace treaty between two governments. Let's be honest, for most Sierra Leoneans, the thought of voluntarily boarding a plane back home after tasting the American dream sounds about as likely as a Freetown taxi driver politely obeying a no parking sign. But that's where the humor ends, because for those facing deportation, the reality can be brutal. Family separation, financial ruin, and social stigma. A case study in African pragmatism. Across Africa, nations have responded differently to similar U.S. sanctions. Nigeria, 2019, quietly negotiated its way out of the Trump-era visa restrictions by introducing digital passport verification and sharing biometric data with U.S. authorities, a move that made privacy advocates uneasy but worked diplomatically. Eritrea, on the other hand, refused to cooperate on deportations and endured prolonged visa suspensions. It took 4 years before any semblance of normalcy returned. The Gambia faced Section 243D sanctions in 2016, which were only lifted after Banjul signed a bilateral returns agreement, promising faster issuance of travel documents for deportees. The lesson is simple: compliance, real or staged, often unlocks the gates to better diplomacy. The question for Sierra Leone is whether the newly formed committee will go beyond window dressing, producing measurable results, transparent communication, and ideally, a political win for both sides. Domestic implications, balancing cooperation, and sovereignty. While Minister Kaba's announcement may seem routine, it actually reflects a sensitive domestic balancing act. President Bio's administration must appear cooperative internationally, yet defensive nationally, ensuring citizens don't perceive the move as outsourcing national dignity. Political analysts in Freetown note that this committee's timing is also strategic, arriving months before key U.S. congressional immigration hearings that may reassess African cooperation levels. By acting now, the government positions itself as a constructive partner, potentially protecting Sierra Leone from harsher future restrictions. Economically, however, the repercussions are deeper. The diaspora is a financial lifeline. Sierra Leone receives an estimated $600 million annually in remittances. World Bank 2024. If visa sanctions tighten further or overstayers fear detection, remittance channels could shrink, undermining household income and foreign exchange stability. As one Freetown economist joked recently, "We need our people in America. They send more dollars than our cocoa exports." Regional dynamics, a continental ripple. The Sierra Leone case has reignited debate within ECOWAS about collective bargaining on migration issues. Some policy experts propose an ECOWAS migration charter to negotiate group-wide terms with the U.S. and EU, ensuring small states like Sierra Leone or the Gambia aren't bullied individually. A joint West African approach could involve unified deportation protocols, preventing inconsistent treatment between member states, shared reintegration funds, possibly financed by diaspora bonds or multilateral partners. Regional ID systems, integrating biometric verification to improve trust with international partners. If successful, such cooperation could transform migration from a diplomatic liability into an economic development tool. After all, Africa's diaspora, estimated at over 170 million people globally, is not a problem to manage, but a resource to harness. Forward-looking opportunities, turning a crisis into a strategy. Instead of viewing the U.S. sanctions as punishment, Sierra Leone could reframe them as a catalyst for reform. Here's how. 1. Digital identity revolution. Fast-track integration between NCRA, immigration, and the foreign ministry, creating a seamless biometric verification system. This would not only satisfy the U.S., but also help curb passport fraud and improve national security. 2. Diaspora Policy Reinvention launch a Return with Dignity initiative, offering returning Sierra Leoneans startup grants, land access, or microcredit schemes. If well-branded, voluntary return could become a patriotic choice, not a punishment. 3rd, negotiation leverage. Sierra Leone could tie cooperation to developmental benefits. We'll help you deport, you help us build. Such transactional diplomacy might sound blunt, but it's how realpolitik works. 4. Image rehabilitation campaign. The Ministry of Information and the U.S. Embassy's ongoing joint messaging on visa compliance could evolve into a full public diplomacy campaign, highlighting success stories of legal migration. Think TV features, diaspora ambassadors, and social media influencers showing that legal travel still works. 5. Economic diversification. Reduce the economy's dependence on remittances by investing in digital services, agriculture, and tourism. When your country offers decent jobs at home, fewer citizens will risk overstaying abroad. A slice of satire, bureaucracy meets reality. Of course, implementing all this requires efficient bureaucracy, and therein lies Africa's eternal irony. As one wit in Freetown quipped, if the committee meets twice a week, writes 3 memos, and holds 1 press briefing, that's already success. The challenge isn't just political will, it's administrative velocity. Tracking overstayers through handwritten files or disconnected databases is like using a kerosene lamp to hunt for a missing solar panel. Unless the process goes digital, it risks becoming another paper tiger prowling the corridors of the foreign ministry. The U.S. angle. Between pressure and partnership. On Washington's side, the policy logic is pragmatic. America wants faster deportation cooperation to maintain control over migration numbers. But there's also an element of symbolic signaling, demonstrating toughness to domestic audiences. U.S. immigration officials have publicly praised countries that cooperate promptly. State Department briefing, July 2025, while warning that non-compliance will invite broader visa review. Yet privately, diplomats acknowledge that sanctions often hurt law-abiding applicants more than the overstayers they target, since the latter rarely apply for visas again anyway. This mismatch between intended deterrence and actual impact is what makes the Sierra Leone case a microcosm of global migration hypocrisy. It's like trying to stop speeding by banning seatbelts. The wrong people pay the price. The human side. Between hope and uncertainty. For Sierra Leoneans abroad, the situation evokes mixed feelings. Some fear being rounded up. Others hope the committee's success might eventually reopen doors for legal travel. Community organizations in the U.S., particularly in Maryland, New York, and Texas, are urging calm and encouraging members to regularize their status where possible. Meanwhile, social media has erupted with humor and skepticism. One meme making the rounds shows a man hiding behind a "no visa, no problem" t-shirt with the caption, "I came for 2 weeks, stayed for 2 presidents." Behind the laughter, though, lies anxiety. For many, returning home means starting over in an economy where youth unemployment still hovers above 60%. That's why any repatriation plan must include realistic reintegration, not just a handshake at the airport. Between diplomacy and dignity, Sierra Leone's special committee could mark a turning point, either toward restored diplomatic relations and modernized migration management, or toward another well-intentioned policy buried in paperwork. Its success will depend on transparency, diaspora engagement, and reciprocal goodwill from Washington. In the grand African picture, this episode underscores a deeper truth. The continent's migration diplomacy is no longer about who travels, but who controls the narrative of movement. If managed wisely, Sierra Leone might just turn its current visa headache into a passport for broader reform, a lesson other African countries could emulate. And who knows, maybe one day, instead of forming committees to bring people back, Freetown will be forming committees to manage the inflow of returning investors and brain gain professionals. Now, wouldn't that be a visa story worth overstaying for? Reintegration and diaspora diplomacy. Can Sierra Leone turn overstayers into investors? When Sierra Leone's Foreign Minister Timothy Kaba announced the formation of a special committee to address U.S. visa overstayers, few imagined how complex and consequential the aftermath could become. The policy is no longer just about deportation or diplomacy. It's fast becoming a test of how Africa manages the return of its own people, not as failures, but as potential nation builders. Because let's face it, the phrase voluntary return has a PR problem. It sounds like a polite euphemism for, come back home, we have no choice but to accept you. But what if Sierra Leone flipped the script, transforming returnees from reluctant passengers into pioneers of development? 1. The reintegration dilemma, home but not yet belonging. Returning home after years in the U.S. isn't just a change of address. It's a cultural shock therapy session. Many deportees return with fragmented identities, too American to fit in back home, too Sierra Leonean to belong abroad. According to the International Organization for Migration, IOM, reintegration programs succeed only when returnees receive social acceptance, economic opportunities, and psychological support. In other words, giving someone a plane ticket and a handshake at Lungi Airport won't cut it. In Sierra Leone's case, a realistic plan would include skills mapping. Identify the professional and technical expertise of returnees, from mechanics in Texas to nurses in Maryland, and connect them with local industries. Startup incubation. Offer micro grants or tax breaks to returnees who want to start small businesses. Community reintegration. Use local councils and civil society groups to welcome returnees through community service and cultural reintegration programs. Without such measures, the government risks replacing visa overstayers in America with job overstayers in Freetown. 2. The diaspora paradox, brain drain versus brain circulation. Every African government loves to praise its diaspora, until the conversation turns to migration enforcement. Then suddenly, everyone is a suspect. But here's the irony. The same Sierra Leoneans being deported are part of the diaspora whose remittances keep the country's economy afloat. World Bank 2024 estimates Sierra Leone's remittance inflows at about $600 million, roughly 15% of GDP, larger than agriculture exports combined. That's why the government's new approach must balance accountability with opportunity. Instead of shaming overstayers, why not invite them to invest, mentor, or collaborate on development projects? After all, if a man can survive 5 years dodging U.S. immigration officers, surely he has the resilience to run a business in Sierra Leone's power outage economy. African comparisons. Ghana turned return migration into a brand with its Year of Return, 2019, drawing thousands of African Americans and returnees to invest, tour, and reconnect. Ethiopia offers special diaspora bonds for citizens abroad, raising millions for infrastructure and energy projects. Rwanda's Come and Build program provides land, tax incentives, and professional reintegration for returnees, turning brain drain into brain gain. Sierra Leone can borrow a page from these playbooks and perhaps add its own twist. Operation Nor Run, Nor Hide, Build Salone instead. 3. U.S.-Sierra Leone. Relations, from sanctions to soft diplomacy. Historically, Washington's migration sanctions have been a blunt instrument, but smart diplomacy can turn punishment into partnership. Minister Kaba's diplomatic calculus seems to be this: demonstrate cooperation now, negotiate relief later. It's a bet worth making. Washington has quietly eased visa sanctions on compliant nations before, notably Cambodia, 2023, and Guinea, 2022, once they began processing deportee documentation promptly. Sierra Leone's ace card is its reputation for stability and democratic governance compared to many of its neighbors. By showing goodwill, the BO administration can position Sierra Leone as a reliable partner in responsible migration management. But here's the trick: such goodwill must be reciprocated, not exploited. As one Freetown diplomat half-joked, if the U.S. wants us to take back our people, maybe they can take back some of our student loan interest rates too. 4. The opportunity: building a diaspora-driven economy. If Sierra Leone plays its cards right, this crisis could spark one of the most ambitious diaspora transformation programs in West Africa. Imagine a return and rebuild fund, co-financed by government, private banks, and international partners, offering loans and grants to returnees who establish businesses or social enterprises. Or consider a diaspora skills exchange program, pairing deported professionals with Sierra Leonean institutions that need expertise in medicine, construction, ICT, or education. Even more visionary would be a second chance visa initiative, a bilateral arrangement where returnees who successfully reintegrate for 5 years could reapply for legal travel visas, turning forced return into future mobility. That's what mutual respect looks like in 21st century migration diplomacy. 5. The broader African lesson: migration as a mirror. Sierra Leone's current drama is Africa's recurring dilemma. From Nigeria's overstayer crackdowns to Uganda's repatriation challenges, every African state is negotiating its place in a world where migration is both aspiration and accusation. Instead of fighting over who sends or receives migrants, the continent must focus on why so many still feel they must leave. Until African economies offer stability, fair wages, and political accountability, visa committees will keep replacing economic opportunities. As the African Union's Agenda 2063 rightly proclaims, free movement of people within Africa should be as valued as mobility beyond it. Perhaps one day, the same zeal used to chase overstayers abroad will be used to create jobs for underemployed youth at home. 6. Humor with a hard truth. There's an old Sierra Leonean proverb: you can't chase a goat and still expect it to milk itself. Translation: you can't deport your diaspora and still expect them to send remittances. The government must tread lightly. Deportation without reintegration is simply a revolving door of despair. The real victory will come when returning citizens become returning investors and migration policy becomes development policy. Maybe the next press release from the Foreign Ministry will read, Sierra Leone welcomes 200 returnees, 150 opened businesses, 50 hired staff, and 0 applied to leave again. Now that would be diplomacy worth celebrating. 7. A glimpse into the future: Africa's migration renaissance picture. By 2030, Sierra Leone and other ECOWAS states have formed a regional migration alliance, negotiating jointly with Western powers. African countries collectively manage returns, reintegration, and mobility, trading data for development. Visa restrictions become obsolete as identity systems harmonize and labor migration is formalized across sectors. Diaspora offices evolve into ministries of global citizenship, managing a transnational African identity, where a Sierra Leonean in New York and a Ghanaian in Toronto are both seen as continental assets, not liabilities. If that sounds idealistic, remember, 50 years ago, the idea of a United States of Africa also sounded like fiction. Yet today, the dream is still alive. And perhaps in this small visa dispute lies the spark of a continental awakening. Sierra Leone's visa committee may have started as a bureaucratic exercise, but it's now a moral and economic experiment. Can a nation use compassion, innovation, and diplomacy to turn migration pain into national gain? If it succeeds, Sierra Leone won't just lift visa restrictions. It will lift the continent's imagination. And when that day comes, the next generation of Sierra Leoneans may finally travel, not as overstayers, but as overachievers. Reintegration realities, from hustlers to home builders. When Sierra Leone announced its committee to track and repatriate citizens who overstayed U.S. visas, skeptics expected another government task force destined to meet twice, issue a communique, and dissolve quietly into the archives. Yet, months later, the initiative has opened a far deeper conversation across Africa, not about deportations, but about how to turn migration into development. The challenge now is implementation. How can returning Sierra Leoneans become productive citizens rather than resentful symbols of lost dreams? 1. The practical playbook. What reintegration could look like. To avoid repeating history's mistakes, Sierra Leone can draw on successful African reintegration frameworks. A. The Ghanaian Blueprint, Ghana's Return and Rebuild offshoot of its Year of Return program, provides a model. It couples re-entry visas with business registration assistance, mentorship, and diaspora investment summits. If adapted, Sierra Leone could establish a returnee resource center in Freetown, a one-stop office providing legal aid, job matching, and entrepreneurship guidance. Create a diaspora reinvestment grant that offers seed funding for small enterprises founded by returnees. B. The Rwandan approach. Rwanda's national talent mobilization strategy identifies skills among returnees and fast-tracks them into public sector and innovation roles. Sierra Leone could replicate this with an integrated skills registry, linking returnees to ministries, universities, and startups in need of talent. C. The Kenyan model. Kenya's government operates a digital diaspora portal where returning citizens register for tax breaks, housing schemes, and investment incentives. Sierra Leone's NCRA and Immigration Department could partner to launch a similar digital reintegration platform, transparent, trackable, and open to public scrutiny. These models share one principle: reintegration must be developmental, not punitive. A deported engineer is still an engineer. What matters is how society receives him. 2. Building the returnee economy. From frustration to innovation. If managed strategically, Sierra Leone could harness return migration as a pillar of national growth. Picture this: returnee-led tech hubs in Freetown and Bo, powered by professionals who learned coding, logistics, or nursing in the U.S. Agribusiness cooperatives led by former overstayers bringing modern supply chain know-how. Diaspora real estate partnerships where returnees invest in housing projects rather than remittances alone. A country that sees returnees as innovators, not liabilities, transforms deportation into an opportunity for reverse brain drain. 3. Regional lessons. When Africa invests in its own people. Migration crises often expose Africa's biggest paradox. Its people are its most valuable export and its most underutilized resource. Nigeria's Diaspora Commission is building digital bridges to 17 million Nigerians abroad, linking them to startups and infrastructure projects. Senegal channels remittances through community development funds that build roads and schools. Ethiopia's diaspora bonds financed a hydroelectric dam once thought impossible. Sierra Leone can join this new generation of nations that see migration as mobility capital. The policy question isn't, how do we stop people from leaving? It's, how do we make leaving and returning part of a cycle of growth? 4. The political equation. Between accountability and empathy. Minister Kaba's committee will succeed only if it can balance political firmness with human understanding. Tracking overstayers may please Washington, But how deportees are treated will determine how history remembers this initiative. Every press release should emphasize human dignity as much as national compliance. And perhaps, once reintegration programs are running, Sierra Leone could invite U.S. officials to witness firsthand how deported citizens are rebuilding lives. A subtle reminder that human beings aren't case numbers, they're development partners. Advice to African leaders, from crisis managers to vision architects. African leaders must move from reactionary diplomacy to proactive migration governance. Here are a few truths, served with a sprinkle of humor and hard realism. 1. Stop forming committees only when Washington sneezes. Build permanent migration councils that forecast and plan, not just respond. 2. Invest in your people before the West invests in their deportation. Youths who find opportunity at home won't overstay abroad. 3. Speak with one African voice. Collective bargaining through the African Union, or ECOWAS, gives small states leverage. As the saying goes, a single broomstick breaks easily, a bundle sweeps the room. 4. Trade data for development wisely. Share biometric or migration information only in exchange for capacity building, scholarships, or labor mobility quotas. Cooperation must be reciprocal, not servile. 5. Celebrate the diaspora, don't criminalize it. Turn them into investors, mentors, and cultural ambassadors. Remember, remittances have built more schools than many national budgets combined. 6. Build narratives, not just borders. Migration is not a crime. It's part of Africa's DNA. Leaders must own the story, not let foreign media define it. Key messages and takeaways. Theme core insight. Implication for Africa, migration diplomacy. Visa disputes are as much about politics as people. African states need unified, transparent negotiation strategies. Reintegration deportees can become innovators with the right support. Governments should offer economic incentives and psychosocial aid. Diaspora engagement. The diaspora is a development engine, not a diplomatic burden. Create platforms for skill transfer, mentorship, and investment. Governance and sovereignty compliance without dignity erodes legitimacy. States must protect citizens' rights while cooperating globally. Pan-African cooperation, shared migration frameworks amplify bargaining power. ECOWAS and AU must institutionalize migration coordination. Humor and humanity. Migration policies without compassion fail socially. Empathy humanizes governance and wins hearts abroad. The continent's wake-up call. Sierra Leone's special committee may have been born out of diplomatic tension, but it carries a moral challenge for every African nation. Will we continue exporting hope and importing despair? Or will we finally build societies that our people don't feel compelled to escape from? The answer lies not in Washington's visa offices, but in Africa's own corridors of power. The day African leaders treat migration as a tool of transformation rather than a tale of punishment is the day the continent's brightest minds will stop fleeing and start flying home by choice. And if that sounds idealistic, so be it. After all, every great African Renaissance began as an impossible idea. Because when Africans start returning not out of fear but out of faith, that will be the real homecoming story. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV, where Africa speaks truth to power. Sierra Leone's visa overstay saga reminds us that diplomacy isn't just about borders. It's about people, integrity, and imagination. If Africa can turn migration crises into innovation opportunities, then maybe, just maybe, we'll stop exporting hope and start building it right here at home. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our fearless analyses from across the continent. Together, let's keep Africa bold, informed, and united.